The UN Security Council backs Trump's Gaza plan. US President Trump hails the UN Security Council's backing of his proposed Board of Peace in Gaza. Hamas rejects the new UN resolution on Gaza, accusing it of endorsing Israel's position. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and we start our first news bulletin of the day with a growing controversy over the latest UN Security Council resolution on Gaza, as Palestinian factions and regional powers sharply differ over its terms and implications.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. There was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful, and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate, and you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great president, and I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
The UN Security Council has approved a US-drafted resolution backing President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan, including the deployment of an international force, with 13 votes in favor and only Russia and China abstaining. The Security Council adopted a 13-0 vote to the resolution supporting the Trump plan for Gaza, which calls to bolster ceasefire arrangements and the deployment of international forces to help stabilize the territory. Russia and China abstained, but did not use their veto, allowing Washington to hail the outcome as a historic and constructive step. The text sets out a framework for international involvement on the ground and is expected to be followed by detailed negotiations on the force's mandate, composition, and rules of engagement. US President Donald Trump has hailed the UN Security Council's backing of a proposed Board of Peace, calling it one of the most important steps the United Nations will ever take. Speaking at an event in Washington, President Donald Trump promoted the Security Council's endorsement of the Peace Board for Gaza, saying it would include himself and leaders of what he described as very important and respected nations. He argued the body will play a central role in overseeing the peace process and reconstruction, and called its creation one of the most important things the United Nations will ever do.
And it's going to be comprised of myself and leaders of other very important nations and very respected nations, and it's going to be...
Palestinian Foreign Minister Wassem Arabikian Shahan says the UN Security Council's endorsement of President Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza is a necessary first step on a long and complex road to peace. Shahan welcomed the Security Council's adoption of the US-drafted resolution backing President Trump's Gaza plan. She said the vote is only an initial step, stressing that key issues such as Palestinian self-determination and eventual independence still need to be resolved, and that implementation of the plan must be grounded in international law. The Palestinian Authority in Ramallah has also welcomed the resolution and signaled its readiness to take part in the process, even though the text does not spell out a clear role for the PA.
International law that it's not divorced from the New York Declaration, that it truly embodies the issue.
As for Hamas, they rejected the UN Security Council's resolution on Gaza, accusing it of adopting Israel's position and imposing international guardianship over the Strip, as residents in Khan Yunis continue to live amid rubble and tents. Amid shattered buildings and makeshift tents in Khan Yunis, Hamas is denouncing the US-drafted UN Security Council resolution, backing President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan and an international force. The group's spokesperson, Hazem Qassem, said that the text ignores Palestinian interests undermines the unity of the Palestinian political system, and imposes a new form of guardianship over Gaza. He argued the Council should instead adopt a resolution that ends the war, prevents any renewed offensive, guarantees the entry of aid, and opens a political pathway towards an independent Palestinian state. While Washington has hailed the vote as historic, Hamas says it does not meet the demands of people living under bombing and displacement. Palestinians in Gaza City are voicing concerns over the UN Security Council's endorsement of President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan, warning the resolution risks imposing international guardianship and separating Gaza from the rest of the Palestinian homeland. Residents in Gaza City say the Security Council's decision to back the US-drafted plan to end the war feels less like support and more like outside control. Some Palestinians describe the move as a form of American trusteeship and guardianship that could fragment Gaza from the wider Palestinian territories, while the envisioned force would be tasked with stabilization and demilitarization, including decommissioning weapons and dismantling military infrastructure. Others say that after 2 years of war on what they called what is a genocide, aid is being turned into a tool of political pressure rather than unconditional relief. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz has hailed the Security Council's adoption of a resolution backing President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan and authorizing an international stabilization force as a historic step. The U.S. envoy said the Security Council's endorsement of President Trump's Gaza peace plan marks a historic moment after members voted for a resolution that authorizes an international stabilization force for the Strip. Waltz thanked Council members for charting a new course in the Middle East for Israelis, Palestinians, and the wider region, framing the plan as a framework for security, reconstruction, and political transition.
Security is the oxygen that governance, that development needs to live and to thrive. The International Stabilization Force will stabilize the security.
German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has welcomed the UN Security Council's resolution to end the war in Gaza as a good news, while urging Serbia to clearly align with EU policy on Ukraine and democratic values. Speaking in Belgrade after talks with his Serbian counterpart, Wadephul said the adoption of the US-drafted UN Security Council resolution backing President Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza and authorizing an international force was good news, adding that Germany stands ready to play a constructive role in Gaza's reconstruction. And he also said that and called on Serbia to make a clear choice in favor of the European Union by aligning itself with EU positions on Ukraine and broader foreign and security policy. Wadephul stressed that the recent protest violence is a concern and underlined that the rule of law and the freedom of assembly and expression are non-negotiable.
Kairo zu reisen oder auch andere Maßnahmen zu ergreifen, die dazu beitragen, dass es vorangeht.
Israeli far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is Mahmoud Abbas if the UN backs recognition of a Palestinian state. The National Security Minister called on the Prime Minister to authorize these targeted killings of senior PA members, as well as the detention of the current President Mahmoud Abbas if the United Nations endorses this idea. The UN Security Council is due to vote on Monday on a US-drafted resolution supporting President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan that passed with 13-0 vote. And like the earlier draft said, the latest version had referred to a possible future Palestinian statehood, prompting Ben-Gvir to demand hard-line responses to this adoption. For more analysis, we now move to Ronald Assas in our newsroom. To you, Ronald.
Thank you so much, Reham. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Chairman of the Board of Directors of the International Commission to Support Palestinian Rights, Dr. Salah Abdelati. Welcome to Qnews, sir. And we start off by asking you in legal terms, does the new Security Council resolution create binding obligations to end the blockade and protect civilians, or is it a political endorsement without enforcement teeth?
Of course, good evening to you. This resolution that was issued yesterday, and apart from the comments, yes, it has binding resolutions and puts Gaza under a transitional government, and then we will have a peace protecting force in the Gaza Strip, according to President Trump's peace plan that was put in Sharm el-Sheikh. And of course, it let us have lots of comments, and we have lots of notes here. The Palestinians are afraid that it will have that it will allow foreign forces to take control of the Gaza Strip and will have more binding obligations. And so we have a new draft resolution, and yeah, it has some positive sides, like seizing, like a ceasefire and allowing more aid into the strip. But now we also face a new phase. But what's more important here is building on the positive points that were mentioned in this resolution to stop the Israeli violations, stop the attacks and the aggression, and then deliver aid to Gaza, and then all the way to reconstruction of the Gaza Strip and allowing the Palestinians to have the self-determination and then having a Palestinian statehood.
What explicit safeguards must be written into the follow-on talks to ensure an international force upholds Palestinian self-determination rather than imposing de facto guardianship, sir?
Here, the guarantees actually, or the safeguards, are the peacekeeping forces that will be here according to the UN and the humanitarian law, and the UN councils that have to do with the Palestinian cause. And here the Palestinians actually depend on them fully to have a framework and a timeline to make sure that things will be in order in the Strip, and so that they don't have to come and contact the peacekeeping forces and the Palestinians, and just to have it as forces to protect the civilians and have reconstruction start.
How should the mandate define protection of civilians and freedom of movement so that access to hospitals, schools and crossings is guaranteed, sir, not left to military discretion?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and it is not just leaving things in the Gaza Strip to the control of the Israeli administration and stalling the delivery of aid, for example, and the reconstruction of the facilities in the Gaza Strip, especially in the inhumane conditions that are going on in the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinians are suffering from because of the genocide that they have been experiencing.
How can the resolution be operationalized, sir, without fragmenting the Palestinian territory? And what legal language links Gaza directly to the West Bank and East Jerusalem in one political track?
Yeah, this actually has to do with the Palestinians more, to get back their unity and to make sure that they call for the unity and sovereignty of their country. And also we need resolutions from the International Court of Justice and also the UN Security Council to make sure that the Palestinian land remains intact and to recognize a Palestinian state.
Discuss more about the detainees and the remains files, sir. What rights-based framework can deliver verifiable releases and identifications with timelines, family access, and judicial oversight, rather?
Yeah, we have the Geneva Convention and the fourth convention also that protects the civilians, and both apply to the Palestinian land. But the occupation country refuses to honor these conventions and to release the names and location of the detainees, and to stop killing or assassinating the detainees. And then also we need to hold Israel accountable for their aggressions and violations with everything that's going on, like the harassment cases, and also medical ignorance, the genocide, the killing of children, and so on. And so we need pressure on Israel and to have them release the detainees, children, women, the seniors, and to have Israel honor its agreement.
That was Dr. Salah Abdelati from Cairo, the chairman of the board of directors of the International Commission to Support Palestinian Rights. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on Qnews. And now I go back to my dear colleague Riham Morsi in our studios. Riham?
Thank you so much, Rana, for that interview. Thank you for conducting it. And we move on to southern Gaza, where 76 Palestinian patients and companions have arrived at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis after more than 2 years stranded outside the strip and unable to return home. Officials say the patients had been receiving treatment in 2 hospitals in the occupied East Jerusalem in October 2023. Hamas launched an attack on Israel that triggered the current war and sealed their route back to Gaza. Since then, they have been stuck outside the strip, separated from families and unable to continue care at home. Their return followed coordination between the medical authorities and agencies handling patient transfers, offering a rare moment of relief amid ongoing destruction and displacement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that he will urgently convene cabinet ministers to ensure Israelis responsible for the latest attacks and wave of attacks against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are brought to justice. Netanyahu described the perpetrators as a small extremist group attempting to take the law into their own hands, and vowed to deal with the phenomenon personally, calling on law enforcement to act in the fullest extent of the law. In a separate statement, the Defense Minister, Yisrael Katz, indicated that the government would soon approve a landmark decision to allocate resources and funding to significantly address the violence. Heavy winter rains have brought a new wave of suffering to the Gaza Strip, overwhelming makeshift camps and deepening the humanitarian crisis for hundreds of thousands of displaced families. In neighborhoods like Shajaiya, sudden downpours have turned displacement sites into waterlogged traps. Families already facing severe shortages of life-saving aid are now exposed to freezing temperatures and the growing threat of a waterborne disease. Residents remain barred from returning to areas still controlled by the Israeli military, and reconstruction is minimal. Iraq has confirmed final election results showing Prime Minister Mohammed Shia Sudani's list came first, with 46 seats in the 329-member parliament. Independent High Electoral Commission Chairman Omar Ahmad praised the process, stating that the elections witnessed a remarkable turnout from voters who freely expressed their will in a secure environment, contributing to the strengthening of a democratic path in Iraq. The Commission emphasized its commitment to the highest standards of professionalism, transparency, and integrity throughout the process. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited Spain's parliament in Madrid as part of a European tour ahead of the meeting with Spanish leaders and a planned trip to Turkey to revive talks on ending the war in Ukraine. Zelensky was welcomed at Spain's Congress by Parliament Speaker Francina Armengol and Senate President Pedro Royan, greeting members of the Parliamentary Bureau before signing the Book of Honor. He is due to meet Spain's defense minister and senior defense executives, then have lunch with King Felipe. Later, he will join Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and view Picasso's Guernica and hold a joint press conference at the Moncloa Palace. Zelensky says he plans to travel to Turkey on Wednesday in a fresh push to restart talks with Russia on ending the war, with a Turkish source saying U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is also expected to join discussions there. The Kremlin says Russia will not join planned talks on Ukraine in Turkey on November 19th, even as President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. officials prepare to meet in Istanbul to discuss ending the war. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that no Russian representatives will take part in Wednesday's talks in Turkey, saying current contacts are taking place without Moscow's participation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he will travel to Turkey in a bid to revive negotiations on ending the war, with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff also expected to attend. Peskov added that President Vladimir Putin remains open to discussions with the United States and Turkey on the outcome of the meetings. A source close to Putin's envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, said he will not travel to Istanbul, noting he already held very productive talks with Witkoff in the U.S. in late October. Both Russia and Ukraine reported continued military action, with a significant development taking place in Paris as the Ukrainian president secured a major defense commitment from France. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that its forces struck 142 areas in Ukraine over the past 24 hours. The targets reportedly included fuel and energy facilities, railway infrastructure, long-range drone storage sites, and locations used by Ukrainian troops and foreign mercenaries. The Ukrainian air forces countered that Russian forces launched attacks using 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 128 drones since Sunday evening. Ukrainian air defense forces claim to have shot down or suppressed 91 of the drones. Separately, the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy reported that Russian attacks damaged energy infrastructure in the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv, Odessa, and Donetsk region. Britain has said it would make refugee status temporary and speed up the deportation of those who arrive illegally in a major overhaul aimed at stemming the rise of populist Reform UK Party and tackling abuse of the current system. Interior Minister Shabana Mahmood outlined changes to how the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, should be interpreted by the UK courts to give the government greater control over who can remain in Britain. Under a proposal, the government wants to change the interpretation of Article 8 of the ECHR governing the right to a family life. It would make clear that a family connection means immediate family, such as parent or child, preventing people from using dubious connections to stay in the UK.
Permanent settlement will now come at 20 years, not 5. I know this country welcomes people who contribute, and for those who want to stay...
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States intends to proceed with the sale of F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. The announcement comes before he is scheduled to host Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House for diplomatic talks. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has requested up to 48 of the advanced U.S.-made stealth fighters, a potential multi-billion-dollar defense deal that had already cleared a necessary Pentagon review. This move represents a significant shift in U.S. policy, as the F-35 has historically been reserved for Israel in the Middle East.
I will say that we will be doing that. We'll be selling F-35s here. Would I do that on the land corridors? I would rip us off.
The United Nations has hailed an important moment for victims as Bangladesh's ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was found guilty on 3 counts, including incitement, ordering killings, and failing to prevent atrocities during the uprising. UN human rights spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani added, however, that the UN regrets the imposition of the death penalty, which they oppose in all circumstances. The United Nations report estimated that up to 1,400 people were killed and thousands wounded, most by gunfire from security forces during the anti-government demonstrations between July 15th and August 5th last year. The worst political violence in Bangladesh since the 1971 War of Independence. Hasina, who fled the neighboring India in August 2024 at the height of the uprising against their government, issued a statement dismissing the court as a rigged tribunal.
The trials have been conducted in absentia and led to a capital punishment sentence. We also regret the imposition of...
France's Louvre has closed some rooms hosting Greek vases and some office spaces as a wing designed in the 1930s and now in poor structural conditions. The museum's announcement is the latest sign in the museum's dire need for renovations. It follows a report by the state auditor who said after daring daylight robbery that its management had neglected the building's security and infrastructure while spending too much on artwork acquisition and post-pandemic relaunching projects. The building manager said on Monday that a new technical report showed weaknesses of beams under the second floor of the Sully wing, making it necessary to close the Kapana Gallery on the first floor and relocate 65 museum staff from the second while further checks are underway. Pope Leo has delivered a sharp criticism of world governments, stating that political will is failing to slow global warming and called for an intensified global response. The message was delivered via video at an event on the sidelines of the UN Climate Summit COP30 taking place in Belém, Brazil. The Pope's comments come as delegates entered the second week of negotiations aiming to resolve challenging issues like climate finance and emission reduction goals ahead of the scheduled close. Pope Leo underscored the immediate threat of climate change, noting that creation is crying out in floods, droughts, storm, and relentless heat.
With faith and prophecy to protect the gift he entrusted to us. Paris Agreement.
That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap up, here's a recap of the top stories making headlines for this hour. The UN Security Council backs Trump's Gaza plan. U.S. President Trump hails the UN Security Council's backing of his proposed board of peace in Gaza. Hamas rejects the new UN resolution on Gaza, accusing it of endorsing Israel's position. For more stories and live updates, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok using the handle @QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates.